Hello everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's jump in. It was a Saturday night or maybe early Sunday morning. I can't be sure now, maybe sometime past midnight. I was hanging out with my friend Mark at my house. Mark's been my friend for years. We'd grown up together in these hills, done all kinds of dumb stuff. That night we were doing the usual, watching UFC fights, playing Xbox, messing around, having a few beers, talking shit. The kind of night where maybe nothing happens, but the woods outside feel close and you remember just how wild this land is. We stayed up later than we intended. By the time the last fight was over and the credits rolled on whatever game we were playing, it was pushing 1 a.m. or later. The house was quiet except for the hum of the TV and the lights in the living room. Outside, the night pressed in. Mark looked at me. "Want to take a walk down the trail and smoke a joint?" he said. We'd done that many times. There's a trail that winds out from behind my property, in the woods, that we'd used for walking, exploring, just getting away from house noises. It's not a long trail, maybe a mile or two, but dense. Trees lean over it, branches hang, underbrush presses in. Once you get farther in, it's easy to lose cell signal, easy to feel isolated. At night, the darkness there is oppressive. I shrugged. "Sure, let's go." We grabbed what we needed, lighter, joint, flashlight, though we mostly use phones. Took jackets. The air was cool, crisp with that damp forest smell. Wet leaves, moss, dead sticks, rich soil. The moon was behind clouds, so there was little ambient light. The woods were dark as ink beyond the reach of our small flashlights and phone screens. We walked. The first stretch near familiar ground. The path was fairly wide. Broken branches and fallen leaves cracked underfoot. Every once in a while we'd see the glint of an owl's eye, or hear a raccoon rustling somewhere in the thicket. The sounds were normal forest sounds. Owl calls, wind in the pines, small animals running. Mark and I talked about inconsequential stuff, random stories, memories, jokes. It felt comforting almost. As we progressed deeper, the trail narrowed. The forest walls pressed in. The tree trunks grew thicker, branches tangled. Understory bushes and vines brushed against our legs. The moonlight was mostly blocked. Our footsteps smothered themselves in leaf litter. The sound became muffled. The forest seemed more alive, not in a reassuring way, but as though it watched. We reached the approximate halfway point, maybe 30 minutes from my house. We stood on the trail. It was a clearing of sorts in the path. Trees slightly further apart, but still thick forest all around. We paused, brushing sweat off our foreheads, catching our breath. I handed Mark the joint, we lit it. We stood there, leaning against trees, puffing smoke, chatting quietly. The joint smoke drifted upward, mingling with the cool night air. While we smoked, I noticed how many noises were coming from all directions. Branches creaked, twigs snapped, leaves rustled, small animals chattered. But it felt off. Too many noises, too close. It was like the forest was active in ways it shouldn't have been at that hour. Normally, by that late hour, most animals are quiet. Maybe an owl hoots once or twice. But that night, the forest felt restless. I remember thinking, why are there so many sounds right now? It gave me an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. Mark and I tried to ignore it. We finished smoking, flicked embers into the underbrush, and put the joint away. We turned and resumed walking, heading further down the trail, deeper toward the exit in the other direction. At first, the normal forest sounds continued. The whisper of wind, the occasional snap of twig, the distant rustle of small creatures. But then gradually the forest fell silent. It was like someone hit a switch. The rustling, the creaking, the snapping, all of it stopped. Even the wind seemed to cease. I wasn't surprised so much as I was alert. Something felt wrong. The silence was too perfect. We both slowed, listening. My heart pounded. Mark's breathing was shallow. I could hear it in the stillness. Then I heard it, a voice. It was faint at first, but distinct. It sounded like a human, but unnatural. A mocking, wavering voice, shaky, uncertain, almost mechanical, crackly, like one of those cheap old children's toys with a broken speaker, the kinds where speech garbles, crackles, loops. It didn't speak words I could decipher. No sentences, no names, no phrases I recognized. It was pitch-shifting, stuttering, fluctuating. It almost felt as if it were trying to mimic something, or draw attention, or toy with us. I froze. I looked to Mark. He froze too. The voice repeated, maybe one stuttered syllable trailing off, then another. Over and over, at the same pitch, same volume. It did not seem to come from further ahead or from behind. It felt ambient, like it existed all around. No matter which way I turned, I couldn't pinpoint direction. It was as though the forest itself spoke. I whispered to Mark, "What the hell, do you hear that?" He nodded, eyes wide. We backed up slightly. The voice continued, unperturbed. Panic settled in my gut. I felt an urgent need to run. I grabbed Mark's arm and said, We need to go, now." We turned and sprinted down the trail back the way we came. Our footsteps pounded. Branches whipped by, heart pounding, ears straining. The voice stayed exactly the same volume, same tone, same distance. No matter how fast we ran, it didn't get closer, didn't recede. It followed us in place as though tethered to us. We tried shouting, yelling, but our voices were swallowed by the dark. The voice persisted, mocking, crackling, a loop of static speech. The forest otherwise remained silent. I was terrified. I kept checking behind, expecting to see something, someone or some beast, but saw nothing but darkness, tree silhouettes, shifting shadows. My breath burned, chest heaving, legs screaming for rest but not letting up. Mark was beside me, panting, stumbling. We ran for what felt like forever, but perhaps it was only minutes, or maybe 10. Finally, we emerged from the deeper underbrush into a more open stretch of trail. The exit was maybe 5 more minutes away by foot. We pushed on, adrenaline carrying us. And then the scream erupted behind us, bone-shaking, soul-rending. A raw, guttural, violent scream. Not animal, not human in the usual sense. It felt like something tearing out its own throat. A scream full of rage, agony, madness. It shook the darkness. I swear birds must have taken flight in the surrounding trees. The sound echoed. It reverberated through my ribs. My heart dropped. I stumbled, barely staying upright, lungs burning. I looked over my shoulder and still saw nothing. No figure, no shape, no silhouette. Nothing but deep forest and darkness. But the scream felt only inches behind. I felt raw fear, pure primal horror, as though we had glimpsed the underbelly of existence. I yelled, grabbed Mark's hand, and we bolted, faster. The scream died away, but its echo lingered in my head. Our steps pounded. We wove through trees and shrubs, branches clawing at us, darkness pressing. Somehow by instinct or blind drive, we made it off the trail and into more familiar ground. Within minutes, we reached my car. I slammed open the door, Mark jumped in, I fumbled with keys, started the engine, tires squealed on gravel, and we drove off. We didn't stop until we got home. We didn't speak much the rest of the night. I sat awake for hours, eyes fixed on the windows, ears straining at every whisper outside. I forced myself to believe it was a prank or some animal, or someone messing with us. But deep inside I knew it was something else, something unexplainable, something wrong. In the days after, I kept replaying what we heard. I tried to rationalize maybe someone with a voice modulator hiding in woods. Maybe some insane person? But that scream, so raw. No human could scream that, not at that volume and intensity, and then vanish. And the mocking, crackly, stuttering voice. No technology I know could simulate that perfectly in an open forest and sustain it without feedback, without a source. It defied logic. I didn't tell many people. I told Mark's girlfriend, one other friend, and my sister. Mostly they shrugged, called me imaginative, said woods play tricks. They said maybe it was a mountain lion or big cat. But I know the difference. I've heard mountain lion screams before. This was not that. It was beyond. Over time, I've buried parts in memory. But every now and then, when I'm in the woods at dusk or past dark, I feel the hair on my neck prick, hear distant rustling, and remember that night. The fear rises again. I don't walk that trail again at night. I avoid being alone in those woods after sunset. I don't know exactly what it was. I don't claim it was a ghost or spirit. some fairy tale demon. Nothing mystical in that kind of sense. I just know we encountered something inhuman, something that doesn't belong, something alive in the darkness. That night taught me how deep the darkness can go, how little control we have when the forest wakes. Even now, 2 or 3 years later, I feel that weight in my chest remembering it. The voice, the scream, the void, survived, but I can't forget, and I don't ever want to go back there after dark. That's all I have. So this no shit is the creepiest thing to ever happen to me, and I still can't quite wrap my head around it. I keep replaying it in my mind, hoping some memory will rewrite itself and make sense. But it hasn't yet. I recently bought a small farm in southwestern Virginia, Springville to be exact. I'm from that general area, went to a local high school, did 5 years in the Army with a deployment to Afghanistan, married nearly 10 years. I figured after all that, a quiet life with land, isolation, peace would be just what I needed. I didn't expect this. My farm sits between Tazewell and Bluefield, right off Highway 460. 20 acres of forest connected to a little mountain behind it. The terrain continues into hundreds, maybe thousands of acres of wilderness. The forest is dense, broken only occasionally by old logging roads, cattle pasture, cliffs, rocky outcrops. On one side, the Jefferson National Forest. On the other side, neighbors are sparse, only small properties every so often. The mountain ridge, East River Mountain, looms behind the land. The forest feels endless. Ever since I moved in, I've had that eerie sense that something watched me when I stepped outside after dark. I brushed it aside. You think you're alone in those woods. You imagine shapes, you hear wind, night animals, your own heartbeat. I know how the mind plays tricks, especially in deep, dark woods. So I shrugged it off and carried on. Chores, late nights, checking fences, prepping fields. Then about a week and a half ago, things escalated. That morning I was up at 4:30 a.m. before first light, getting ready to head out. The world was still wrapped in black. I stepped outside, doing my usual routine, checking the barn, feeding animals, surveying fence lines. That's when I began to hear something, a voice or multiple voices, just beyond what I could make out. It was muffled, indistinct, not loud, not clear enough to understand, but enough to freeze me in place. My first thought, somebody's trespassing. I live out here, but I'm not so remote that people couldn't wander in. I grabbed my AR-15, slung my headlamp, and walked toward the tree line where the sound seemed to be coming from. I stuck to the edge, sticking close to the cover of my land so I could call it posted property if I had to. The forest was pitch black under my beam. Tall pines, hardwoods, ferns, underbrush. After a few minutes, my light caught something up the hill, at the top of that little mountain behind my property. A faint, steady light, a flashlight or headlight. It moved slowly, low to the ground, sweeping across thicknesses of trees, scanning. I yelled out, "Hey! You're on posted property." I meant to warn off whoever it was. I held my weapon ready, scanning. The light didn't respond. It kept moving. So I grabbed my dog, a big mixed breed, Dependable, and started uphill toward where I saw the glow. My hope was that whoever it was would either turn around or I'd confront them. Up the slope, the ground was steep, littered with rocks, fallen branches, dense trees. Each step required caution. The headlamp barely pierced more than 10-15 feet ahead. When I got within maybe 150 feet of where the light had been, it vanished. Just gone, just darkness again. I stood there, heart pounding, and yelled, "This is private property, you get out now!" I advanced carefully, eyes scanning. Another 100 yards or so, forcing my way through thickets. Then I locked in on it. 2 huge glowing green eyes hovering in the darkness between trees. They were distant but bright. I froze dead still. The eyes and I remained locked. What came next unraveled me. Whatever it was, creature, thing, mimicked me. Not after a delay, but in real time. I leaned my head to the left and those glowing points tilted exactly the same way. I stepped forward slowly and so did it, matching each micro-movement. My first reaction, "Is that a mirror in the woods?" I whispered that aloud. though I sounded more scared than I intended. The thing shook its head, a slow, deliberate no. I don't know how it did that. The green eyes dipped, then rose, matching a motion of its skull like a primate. It sent a jolt through me. I nearly peed myself. I snapped back into reflex. I shouldered the AR and aimed. "If you take 1 inch toward me, I'll smoke you," I yelled. The moment I spoke, the eyes dropped behind brush. The silhouette vanished. I held still, waiting, breathing hard. Then the eyes popped back up again, in almost the same place, lit. I swear that thing was assessing me. I backed downhill a little. The hill was steep in parts, but I moved backward cautiously, watching that spot. The eyes fixed me for another 10 seconds. Then, abruptly, I saw motion. It bolted to my left, its right, downhill, slithering between trees, trying to flank me. I turned and bolted in response. I didn't want to turn my back, so I ran backward, stumbling over roots and rocks, scrambling. The dog was behind me. I heard nothing behind me. No screams, no heavy footfalls. Just leaves crunching somewhere off to one side. I burst through the tree line onto my own land and made it to the house as fast as I could. I slammed inside, locked every door and window, sliding the bolt across. My heart pounded so loud I thought the walls would shake. My dog sat at the threshold, breathing heavily, but didn't growl. Didn't act like it sensed anything strange. What I saw in that moment of terror is stuck in my head. The being, maybe 7 feet tall, skin and bones, limbs elongated, body thin, a spine like a honeycomb, running low to the ground on all fours, but not quite animal, not quite human. Looked like sinew stretched over bone, with fingers or claws maybe. Its face skeletal, but with those glowing eyes. Whatever it was, it seemed to understand presence, understand space. It knew what movement was, knew how to mimic me. That alone defies everything I know. I don't chalk it up to a bear, no way. Bears don't mimic your steps. A human, sick, deformed, not at that height and speed, especially on all fours. The next day I found the picture I had managed to take. You only see 2 glowing green eyes in the darkness, nothing else. I've stared at it 1,000,000 times. There is no hint of fur, no outline, just eyes. Later that next night, or rather around midnight, something else happened. I went out to check something, step out the porch, and saw a strange object in my driveway. Craft, a UFO. Silent, odd shape, dim lights, low altitude. I snapped another picture. The thing hovered there for maybe a minute, then blinked out. It didn't make noise like a plane. Didn't have a red or white blinking light. It was smooth, dark, subtle. Too quick to identify. Then it vanished. Since then, nothing. No voices, no eyes glowing, no UFOs. But I've changed. I sleep with every light on. I don't venture out after dark. I double lock, secure the perimeter. I've installed motion lights, cameras, night vision. I set traps just in case. I've even considered selling, but I can't walk away. Maybe because part of me wants to know what this thing was, what it wanted, whether it returns. I sit here now, writing this, staring at the woods behind my home. Every crack in a branch sounds like footsteps. My dog sleeps at my side, oblivious. But I'll never forget those eyes. Never forget the way it copied me. Never forget how it stared after me as I ran. I don't claim to know what I encountered. No ghosts, no fairy tales. This was something real out there in those Virginia woods. And I believe it happened. And I believe it's still out there. I grew up spending a lot of my childhood at my uncle's farm in southeast West Virginia. My uncle, my mom's brother, had bought the land back in the 70s, long before I was born, and over time he had built several houses on the property. Some were for family members to live in full-time. Others just sat there for visiting relatives to use whenever they came to stay. My family was one of the ones that came and went. We didn't live there permanently, but we spent weeks at a time there, sometimes whole summers or stretches in the winter, and for me, those visits made up some of my happiest childhood memories. My mom was the oldest of 5 kids, so there were always cousins around. I was the youngest for a long time, and because of that, I got used to tagging along with the older kids, copying what they did, chasing after them even when they didn't really want me to. That farm was the place where I felt the safest. I knew the houses, the fields, the creeks, and the woods better than most places we actually lived in, since my dad's job meant we moved all the time. The farm was my anchor. When I was really little, I don't remember much out of the ordinary happening there. The only thing that really stands out is that I had what I called an imaginary friend that I only ever played with when I was at the farm, nowhere else. Even though we moved from state to state, house to house, I never had that friend appear except when we were in West Virginia. It never struck me as strange back then. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, but looking back, it does make me pause. By the time I was 5 or 6, I had gained some freedom. I was old enough that I didn't have to have someone hold my hand walking from one house to another. That felt huge to me. I could go between my aunts and uncles without someone tagging along. I could wander the paths as long as I didn't get into trouble. And being that age, the woods became the biggest draw. My uncles were hunters, bow hunters mostly, and they had shown me the little platforms they had built up in the trees. They weren't real tree houses, just rough planks nailed high into branches, but to me they were magical. Standing up there, you could see the woods in a different way. They told me that's where they'd sit for hours waiting for deer, watching everything around them. I loved climbing up there and pretending they were my secret forts. One winter, when I was 8, I decided to take off on my own. The snow had fallen heavy and deep the night before, and everything looked new and untouched. I was bundled up in a coat and mittens and hat, and I remember how my breath came out in thick clouds as I set off. I told myself I'd go up the mountain, though really it was more of a huge hill. As a kid, it looked enormous, and climbing it gave me a sense of adventure. I wanted to find one of those platforms again. I thought I knew exactly where it was, but the snow covered everything, hiding familiar landmarks, and after a while, I realized I couldn't find it. I trudged around looking at tree trunks, searching for the boards nailed into them, but every turn looked the same. After a while, I got frustrated. My boots were heavy with packed snow, and I was breathing hard from the climb, so I sat down by a creek that cut across the hillside. The water ran low but steady, making a faint gurgling sound beneath the crust of ice. I wasn't sitting there long, maybe 3 minutes at most, when I heard it. A scream. It cut through the woods so sharp and loud that it froze me in place. It wasn't like any scream I'd heard before. It wasn't just a fox bark or the cry of some animal. It sounded human. Not just human, but pained, furious, and raw. Blood-curdling is the only word that fits it, even though at the time I didn't have the vocabulary for it. My first thought was that it had to be one of my cousins. They had a history of trying to spook me, hiding behind doors or jumping out from barns. This felt like the kind of thing they'd do. Follow me into the woods, wait until I was far from the houses, and then scream to send me running back in fear. I rolled my eyes, stood up, and called out into the trees. Something along the lines of, "Okay, not funny. I'm going home." My voice sounded small against the cold silence. Then I heard crying. It was weeping, loud and heavy. The kind of crying where you can hear the chest shake with it. It wasn't a single sob or a quick wail. It was steady, unrelenting. Whoever it was, they weren't putting it on. They sounded broken. The sound carried through the trees, echoing weirdly, so I couldn't tell where it came from. That's when I sped up. My footprints were clear in the snow, so I followed them, retracing every step back the way I'd come. I walked quickly at first, then almost ran, checking over my shoulder as the crying and screaming kept on. It didn't fade, didn't sound closer or farther away. It just seemed to follow me, constant and awful. I kept waiting for a cousin to come bursting out laughing, or for someone to step out from behind a tree and reveal it was a prank. But no one did. It stayed invisible. Just a voice in the woods, and that made it worse. By the time I got close enough to see the edge of the farm, I broke into a full sprint. My little legs pumped, and I nearly tripped a dozen times on roots hidden beneath the snow. When the outline of my uncle's house came into view, relief hit me so hard I almost cried myself. I ran across the yard, up to the kitchen door, flung it open, and slammed it shut behind me. My chest heaved. My mittens were scratched and torn, and I stood there catching my breath, trying to process what I'd just gone through. But when I looked up, expecting to see my cousins sneaking back inside after their little prank, every single family member was already in the kitchen or the living room. They turned to look at me all at once. My uncle and two of my older male cousins were pulling on coats and boots, clearly about to head outside. My mom and sister were sitting together. Everyone was accounted for. They stared at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I must have looked pale because my mom's face went tight and worried. She came over quickly and put her hand on my shoulder. I remember she asked where I'd been. That's when it hit me. I hadn't been gone for a few minutes like I thought. I'd been gone for hours. My sense of time in the woods had completely slipped away. My uncle asked me what happened, why I looked so shaken. I started to explain, stumbling through the story, trying to put into words the scream and the crying. He listened without laughing, without brushing it off. When I finished, he let out a low breath and said, almost to himself, "Ran into the witch then." At that age, I took it literally. I thought he meant some crazy old woman lived out in the woods like a cottage or a shack, and I'd stumbled too close. I pictured a haggard woman yelling at me from the trees, but later I understood it wasn't a person. The witch was just what they called it, whatever it was. Something in those woods that screamed, cried, and never showed itself. Every cousin older than me had their own story. They didn't always talk about it, but when they did, the details lined up. The sound was always the same. Human enough to trick you, awful enough to send you running. That day changed me. Even as a kid, I never set foot near the tree line again unless I had an adult or a group with me. I loved the farm. I loved the fields, the barns, the houses, but the woods lost their magic for me. I could never shake that sound out of my head. Years later, when I was 21, we were back at the farm for my aunt's funeral. Grief has a way of making you more open to noticing things. That week, several of us saw things near the woods. Red eyes at the edge of the dark. Smoke-like shapes that disappeared when you looked too long. Voices calling faintly, sometimes sounding like someone we knew. I stayed away. I didn't need convincing. The older I've gotten, the more I've realized that Appalachia holds things you can't always explain. Maybe it's the terrain, the echo of the hollers, the way sound carries through ridges and valleys. Maybe it's wildlife making noises you don't expect, or something psychological about being deep in the woods where the isolation twists your senses. But I know what I heard. I know how real it felt, and I know that I've never once stepped into those woods alone again. Even as an adult, even now I won't. That scream, that crying, has lived in my head since I was 8 years old. It was real enough that my body remembers it, real enough that I trust the fear I felt. The farm is still my happy place in so many ways. But the woods, the tree line just beyond the fields, to me that's a wall. That's a boundary, and I don't cross it because once was enough. I grew up in far southwest Virginia, way out in the hills where the roads are more gravel than pavement, and where you can ride around for hours without seeing much of anything except trees, fields, and the occasional rundown house that's been there longer than you've been alive. When I say back roads, I mean the kind that most people don't even bother with anymore. The kind where you can't go too fast without your teeth rattling from the rocks under the tires. The kind where grass grows up in the middle strip because there isn't enough traffic to wear it down. Those are the roads I like to ride when I just want to clear my head. That day, it was late afternoon. The sun was starting to sink low, but not so far gone that I had to worry about losing the light just yet. It had been one of those warm days that you only get in the fall, when the air is crisp, but the sun is still hot enough to make you roll the windows down and let it blow through. I didn't have anywhere I needed to be. I wasn't meeting anyone or running errands. I was just driving, coasting over gravel, listening to the hum of my old truck and letting the world pass slow and steady like the road under me. The road I picked was one I'd been on before, but not too often. It cut back behind a ridge, wound down into a hollow, and followed along a creek for a stretch before curling back up toward a little clearing I knew about. Hardly anybody used it because it was rough, rutted out in places from heavy rain. And if you met another car, one of you was backing up a good ways because there wasn't room for two. That was fine with me. The less traffic, the better. I just wanted to be out where I didn't have to think about anything. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Out there you don't hear much but your own engine and maybe the occasional crow, or the sound of water running somewhere deeper in the woods. Every once in a while, the light would catch through the trees in a way that made the dust from my tires glow like smoke. The smell of it, the dust, the dry leaves, the faint hint of creek water, hung in the cab of the truck when the windows were down. It was one of those drives where you don't think much. You're just there, and the world is rolling past slow and simple. I came around a bend where the road narrowed close to the tree line, and that's when I saw them. At first, it didn't register. I thought maybe it was just a group of hikers, but hikers don't usually wear what I was looking at. The road straightened for a stretch, and there they were. More than 10 of them moving as a group down the middle of the gravel lane. Every single one of them was in white. Long white robes that went almost to the ground. They weren't running or even walking fast, just steady, like they knew exactly where they were headed. The way the light hit that white cloth against the green of the trees made it stand out in a way that looked almost unreal. I slowed down without even thinking about it, the gravel crunching loud under my tires. My heart jumped because I didn't expect to see anyone out there, let alone a whole crowd dressed like that. I don't know what I thought was happening, but every instinct told me I shouldn't be in the middle of it. The road wasn't wide, and they were walking straight down the center like they owned it. For a split second, I thought about just easing forward, maybe passing them. But the idea of driving right up on them made my stomach twist. They hadn't turned toward me yet. They just kept walking, their robes swaying, heads mostly forward. Some turned slightly toward the creek that ran parallel to the road. That creek wasn't more than 50 yards down the embankment in that stretch. And I realized that was where they were headed. My mind started scrambling for explanations. Baptism. That was the first thing that clicked, but it didn't settle me in the moment. It's one thing to know in hindsight what you probably saw. It's another thing to come around a bend and see a dozen people in identical white clothes moving in silence on a back road with no one else around for miles. I dropped it into reverse. My tires spit gravel as I started backing up, slow at first, then faster as I realized how narrow the space was. My eyes kept flicking from the rearview mirror to the figures ahead of me. They never broke stride, never scattered, never made a sound that I could hear over my own truck. I couldn't make out faces clear, just the general shapes under those hoods of cloth. The way their arms hung by their sides or occasionally lifted to steady themselves on the rocks of the road. I kept backing until I found a wide spot, enough to swing the truck around without getting hung up on the ditch. My hands were tight on the wheel, and I could feel my chest thumping harder than it should have for just seeing people walking. But that's the thing about being out in the middle of nowhere. When something doesn't fit, your brain starts tossing out every bad possibility all at once. I didn't want to be the only stranger in the middle of whatever was happening. Once I turned around, I didn't stop until I was back near the main road. I remember the way the gravel finally gave way to pavement, and how much better it felt, like I was back where things made sense again. The sun was dipping lower now, orange across the tops of the ridges, and I realized I'd been gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers ached when I loosened them. I pulled over at a little turnout and sat there with the engine idling. My window was still down, and I could hear the cicadas starting up in the woods. I told myself it had to be a baptism group. I'd heard of churches doing them down in the creeks, especially in the summer and fall. People wore white for that. They'd go down together, sometimes in groups, walk into the water and come back out changed. It made sense when I thought about it. It explained the clothes, the direction they were heading, the silence. But I'll be honest, sense doesn't always stop the feeling you had in the moment. I can still picture how it looked coming around that curve, the flash of white in the middle of a road I thought would be empty. I can still feel that sudden drop in my stomach, that rush of instinct telling me to turn around and get out. I sat there a long time, long enough that the light changed again, fading into that gray-blue where you know night is coming. I thought about going back, maybe even trying to see for sure what they were doing, but I never did. Curiosity wasn't stronger than the way my gut had told me to leave it alone. So I drove home, gravel dust still clinging to the back of my truck, the image of those robes still fresh in my head. In the end, I know it was probably nothing more than a church gathering, a group of folks walking down to the creek to do something that's been done for generations. But in that moment, it didn't feel simple. It felt strange, out of place, and it stuck with me ever since. Because sometimes, even when there's a clear explanation waiting, the way you feel in the middle of something is what lingers. And I'll never forget the sight of those white robes moving slow and steady down a forgotten gravel road, the sun cutting low behind them, and me in my truck with my heart pounding, trying to get back to where things made sense. I was about 10 years old the summer this happened. My parents used to take us to Meacham Lake campgrounds every year, but this one summer was different because we were staying there for the whole season. They loved camping, and my mom especially liked the idea of being away from town for weeks at a time. I remember it was exciting at first. The long drive up into the mountains, the smell of pine as soon as we got out of the car, the sound of the lake when the wind came across it. There was something about that place that felt endless, like the woods and hills went on forever. That first night stands out clearer than almost anything else from my childhood. I can remember the details as if I'm back there. My parents had set up our big family tent, one of those canvas ones with the heavy poles. It smelled like mildew from being in storage all year, but it was big enough for me, them, and my uncle, who had tagged along for the trip. We spent the evening sitting by the fire. My parents and uncle were drinking, laughing with some friends they'd made at the next campsite over. I didn't pay much attention, just ate my hot dog and watched sparks from the fire drift into the trees. When they finally stumbled into the tent later that night, they were more or less useless. They lay down, zipped up their sleeping bags, and were out cold within minutes. I was still awake, lying on top of my bag, listening to the night sounds outside. I liked camping, but sometimes it was hard to sleep that first night. Every sound carried. I could hear loons calling out on the lake, branches shifting with the breeze, the occasional snap of a stick when something moved in the brush. It was normal forest noise, and normally it didn't bother me. But then, out of nowhere, I felt something I can't quite describe. It was like my whole body suddenly registered that something was wrong, even though I couldn't see or hear anything unusual yet. One second I was just lying there, restless, and the next my skin broke out in goosebumps. I felt ice cold, like the air in the tent had dropped 10 degrees. Panic hit me in a wave, so strong and sudden it made my throat tighten. I froze in place. I couldn't move, couldn't even roll over to look at my parents. That was when I heard it. A sound out in the woods, faint at first but steady. The sound of sticks snapping underfoot. Not a squirrel darting through the leaves. Not the light crunch of a raccoon. These were heavy, deliberate steps. Something was walking, slow and steady, and it was getting closer. Then, layered over the footsteps, came a sound that turned my stomach. Breathing. Low, raspy, and uneven, like someone exhausted, struggling to pull in enough air. Every hair on my body stood on end. My parents were right there, just a few feet away, but I couldn't bring myself to wake them. I had this instinct that if I made a sound, even a whisper, whatever was out there would know exactly where I was. I lay there stiff as a board, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The footsteps came closer and closer until they reached the tent. Then the tent wall shifted. The fabric pressed inward, like something was leaning its body against it. The steps circled slowly, dragging along the outside, brushing right up against where I lay. I could hear that breathing now, only inches away through a thin sheet of canvas. It wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't the short huff of a deer or the quick snuffle of a bear. This was long, slow, deliberate breathing, with a wheeze in every exhale. I kept my eyes locked on the ceiling of the tent, too scared to look anywhere else. Time stretched in a way that felt endless. Every second was heavy. My parents didn't stir. My uncle shifted once, muttering in his sleep, but he didn't wake either. I wanted to scream, to shake them awake, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Fear had me pinned. Eventually, my eyes flicked to the side, to where my uncle's small mesh window was unzipped. It was just high enough that you could see through it if you sat up, but lying down, I could still catch glimpses when something moved past. I didn't want to look. Part of me knew it would be worse if I actually saw what was out there, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, won out. The first time it passed the window, I only caught a blur of pale movement. My stomach clenched. When it circled back and passed again, I forced myself to really look. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything I'd seen in my life. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over bones that looked far too sharp. Its body was thin, emaciated with a kind of wrongness to its proportions. Its head was bare, no hair at all, and when it turned just enough for me to glimpse its face, I saw the eyes. Black. Not like dark brown or shadowed, just black. 2 pits in its face that reflected nothing. I couldn't breathe. My body shook, but I pressed my lips shut, forcing myself not to make a sound. The thing circled the tent again and again. Sometimes it leaned harder against the canvas, dragging what might have been fingers along the fabric, slow enough to make a scraping sound. Sometimes it paused right outside and just breathed. I could hear the wet rasp of it, in and out, in and out. Hours passed like that. I didn't sleep a single second. My mind ran wild. I thought about what it wanted, why it was circling us, if it was waiting for me to make a noise. I thought about whether the thin wall of the tent could stop it, if it decided to come in. The whole night stretched on endlessly, me lying there in absolute terror while the thing circled and circled. At some point, exhaustion should have pulled me under, but fear kept me sharp. I lay there until the faintest light of dawn started to filter through the canvas. The gray glow touched the walls of the tent, and for the first time in hours, the thing stopped. The breathing faded. The steps grew quieter. It moved off into the trees, and just like that, it was gone. When the sun finally rose fully, my parents stirred awake, groggy from drinking the night before. I sat up, pale and shaking, still bundled in my bag. My throat felt raw from holding back sobs all night. I told them what I'd seen, what I'd heard. My uncle laughed it off. My dad said it must have been a dream. My mom told me maybe it was a deer or a bear sniffing around. None of them believed me, but I know what I felt. I know what I saw through that window. I hadn't slept all night. I was so exhausted the next day that I collapsed on the cot and slept through nearly the entire daylight hours. You don't sleep like that after a dream. Dreams don't leave you shivering, don't leave you watching the sun with relief, don't leave you remembering every sound, every breath. I never forgot that night. Even now, decades later, I can hear the rasping breath in my mind if I think about it too hard. I can see that pale shape sliding past the window, those black eyes that didn't reflect the firelight. I've been camping many times since then, but I've never felt safe in a tent again. At Meacham Lake in the heart of the mountains, something walked upright and circled our tent until the sun drove it back. And I know with absolute certainty it wasn't a dream. I don't think there's ever been a night in my life that has clung to me the way that one did. It's been over 4 decades, but even now, if I close my eyes and let my mind drift, I can feel the steering wheel under my hands, smell the damp country air pouring through the half-cracked window, and see the way the headlights carved across the trees as we wound through those Appalachian back roads. I've seen and done a lot of things in 60 years, and plenty of moments have faded with time. But that one, what I saw that night, never has. It won't. I know it never will. I was visiting a friend in Hot Springs, Virginia. If you've ever been out there, You know how far from the world it feels. Deep, rolling mountains, thick forests that look almost impenetrable. Old roads that twist and bend with no guardrails, where sometimes you see the faint outlines of cabins or old barns tucked into the woods. But most of the time, it's just dark trees crowding both sides of the road. Her family lived on land their people had held for generations, tucked into a valley between ridges, the kind of place you don't just stumble upon. You have to know it's there. That night we'd been out for a few hours, nothing wild, just some food, music, laughter. I wasn't drunk, not even close, just tired in that pleasant way you get after a long day. My friend was riding shotgun. Both of us relaxed, windows cracked enough to let the night air in. It was quiet out there, so quiet. You don't realize how loud the world is until you're in a place like that, where the only sounds are your tires on gravel and the hum of cicadas and frogs carrying across the hills. It was close to midnight when we turned down one of those narrow country roads that seemed to unravel endlessly ahead of us. The headlights stretched across the branches, catching the pale underbellies of leaves, throwing shadows so sharp they looked like figures darting across the edge of vision. I remember how the yellow beam seemed swallowed up by the blackness beyond, like the dark out there was thicker than normal darkness, like something solid you could lean against. After a while, we came to a fork. The left road curved sharply downhill, disappearing into thicker woods, while the right angled upward, hugging the edge of a ridge. I slowed the car, eased the wheel, and just as the front of the car turned, the beams of the headlights swept across a bush on the inside of the curve. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain didn't register what it was. It looked like a black mass crouched low to the ground, tucked in close behind the brush. My first thought was that it was a deer, maybe a bear, but as the car moved, the headlights lit it more fully, and the thing began to rise. It stood up. It rose in one long, deliberate movement, unfolding from that crouched position until it towered above the bush. I was still rolling forward, but my hands tightened on the wheel and my foot hesitated on the gas. For a split second, I thought I was seeing a man in a heavy cloak, but that thought crumbled as soon as the rest of it came into view. It had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe more, broad, black, like a massive shape swaddled in a heavy shroud. And then there was the head, or what I thought was a head. It wasn't a face. It wasn't anything human. The headlights hit it dead on, and I saw something pale and bone white where its face should have been. Huge, elongated, with empty sockets. It looked like a skull, but not like a person's. More like some enormous cow or steer skull, bleached white by sun and weather, sitting on top of that massive dark shape. The sight of it froze me in a way I can't explain. It wasn't just what I saw. It was the weight of it. Something in my body knew this wasn't just an animal crossing the road. This wasn't something natural. The car rolled past, my eyes locked on it. For a heartbeat, it didn't move. Then I realized I was hearing something. Low and steady at first, like the road noise was rumbling wrong. But no, it was coming from outside. A sound so deep it vibrated in my chest. A growl. Long, drawn out, low and impossibly loud, like the sound of an engine idling too close, except alive. I didn't slam the brakes. I didn't floor it. I just kept the car rolling steady, as if sudden motion would have been a mistake. I remember how my fingers dug into the steering wheel, how my throat tightened. My friend was stiff beside me, staring straight ahead, both of us silent, not daring to breathe too loud. The road bent again, and the thing disappeared from the headlights, swallowed back into the dark. I didn't dare look in the mirrors. I didn't dare stop. We just kept driving, following those narrow winding turns through the woods until the valley opened, and the familiar outlines of her family's farmhouse came into view. When we finally rolled into the driveway, my legs were trembling so badly I could barely keep the clutch steady. I pulled the car to a stop, turned off the headlights, and just sat there, my hand still gripping the wheel like I needed it to hold myself upright. The night around us felt wrong, like the silence was heavier, thicker than before. I don't remember how long we sat there. Long enough for the crickets and frogs to sound normal again. Long enough for my breathing to slow. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I knew she had seen it too. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside the window made my skin crawl. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that towering shape rising from behind the bush, that skull-like face glaring back at me through empty sockets. The next morning, the memory of it was almost worse. The light of day, I wanted to tell myself it had been a trick of shadows, that I'd been tired, that the woods can play tricks on your eyes. But I couldn't convince myself. I remembered it too clearly. The way it stood, the pale shape of that skull, the sound that shook through my chest. Later that day, when we told her parents what we'd seen, I braced for laughter. I wanted them to laugh. I wanted them to tell us we'd been idiots, that it was just a deer standing on a ridge or a stray cow. Anything. But they didn't laugh. Her father's face went pale, his jaw tightening as though he'd been waiting for this. He asked if we'd heard anything, and when I thought back to that low growl, the hair on my arm stood up all over again. He told us other people had seen it. Farmers who'd woken to find sheep slaughtered in their fields. Drivers who swore something had darted across the road in front of their trucks late at night. He said nobody knew what it was, but everyone who'd seen it walked away shaken, and some never wanted to talk about it again. I carried that with me long after I left Virginia. The years went by, and I tried to put it behind me. Tried to tell myself it didn't matter what I saw, that it was probably something explainable if I just thought about it long enough. But the truth is, I can't explain it, and that's what unsettles me most. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't half asleep. I was as clear-headed as I've ever been, and when I replay that night, every detail comes back sharp. The curve of the road, the way the headlights cut through the trees, the exact moment that black shape rose from the brush, the weight of that bone-white skull staring back at us, and that sound, deep, steady, human, that pressed into my chest like a hand. I've lived a long life since then. I've seen storms, accidents, violence. I've been afraid in plenty of situations, but nothing has ever unsettled me the way that thing did. Because fear of storms or men or accidents is fear you can put a name to. Fear, that thing, whatever it was, is fear of the unknown. Fear of something you can't understand and can't control. And in all the years since, I've never gone back down that road at night. I've never wanted to risk seeing it again. Even now, 4 decades later, I still catch myself thinking about it at random moments. Driving alone late at night, walking across a dark field, sitting up in bed when the house creaks in the small hours. The memory always comes back the same, sharp as ever. It stood there. It rose from behind that bush, black and massive, with that bone-white face glaring out from the dark. It saw us, it growled, and it let us go. I don't know what would have happened if it hadn't, and that's the part that keeps me awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, knowing that whatever it was is still out there, somewhere in those mountains, waiting for someone else's headlights to catch it in the dark. I have lived in a lot of different places in my life, from the high deserts of Colorado to the thick forests overseas in places I don't care to name. I've been in enough danger, both man-made and natural, that fear has become more of a familiar companion than an enemy. That said, living here in Northeast Alabama has taught me something new about fear. Real fear. Not the kind that kicks in during a firefight when adrenaline pushes everything else away. Not the kind where you get ambushed and instinct takes over. No, this is different. This is the kind of fear that hangs in the air, that creeps into you when everything is still and quiet. When you know you are armed to the teeth and trained to use every piece of gear you carry, but you also know deep down that it may not matter. I've been here long enough to know the woods like the back of my hand. As a wildlife biologist and someone who has worked with animals most of his life, I can read sign better than most people. I can tell you when a deer has crossed through an area by the way a branch is bent, when coyotes have circled back on a trail, or when hogs have torn up the ground. I can also tell you when the woods don't feel right, when the air itself feels wrong. I used to think that was just something people said, some exaggeration that folks leaned on to make their hunting or camping story sound spookier. But it isn't. There are times out here when I'll stop in my tracks, scan the tree line, and know damn well that I'm not alone, even when I can't hear or see a thing. And it isn't wildlife. The first time I got truly shaken out here was about 6 years ago. I'd been in Alabama for a while by then, enough to adjust to the humidity, the bugs, the thick green of the woods compared to Colorado's dry mountain air. I had taken my G20 out, loaded heavy with the kind of rounds that can punch through hog hide without issue. I had my short barrel AR slung with me, the one built off years of messing with parts and setups, until I had something tuned exactly the way I wanted it. Thermal on top. If something so much as took a piss behind a tree, I'd see it. That was the plan anyway. I was walking a section of forest maybe 2 miles from the house. The terrain out here rolls in that Appalachian way, not mountains like out west, but deep folds and ridges where you can be 50 yards from someone and never know it. I had walked this route before, checking trail cams I'd set up for both the sanctuary and my own curiosity. I was halfway between 2 creeks, the ground soft and damp, my boots sinking just a little with each step. Normally when I stop, the woods settle quick. Birds chirp again, squirrels go back to scurrying, that sort of thing. This time when I stopped, it stayed quiet. That silence is what hit me first. You learn to respect silence out here because it's rarely natural. Even at night, there's usually some noise, a tree frog, an owl, the wind moving the leaves. But when everything locks down, it's a signal. Something is around. Predators will shut a place up. And I know enough to tell the difference between natural quiet and something else. This was the something else. I pulled the AR up, scanned through thermal, nothing. Just trees, branches, cool ground. I swept in slow arcs, pausing at each gap between trunks, expecting a heat signature to glow. Still nothing. I lowered it, listened. My own breathing sounded too loud. The hair on my arms was standing up, which doesn't happen to me often, not even in the worst of situations. Then it hit me. The smell. Metallic, sharp, almost like blood, but not quite. If you've ever been in a butcher shop, you know that iron tang. How it hits your nose and sits in the back of your throat. This was close, but not the same. Stronger, sourer, and it seemed to hang in the air rather than move with the breeze. I froze, controlled my breathing, and scanned again. Still nothing. I told myself it was probably hogs. They stink, and when they tear through brush, they can clear an area of other animals quick. But the thing is, hogs don't move in total silence. They grunt, they crash through underbrush, they root around. And if it had been one, thermal would have picked them up instantly. There was nothing. Just me, my gear, and that smell that had no business being there. I moved on, slow and steady, senses firing in every direction. The smell followed for a while. Then it faded as I crested a ridge and dropped down toward the creek. When I finally got back to my truck, I sat for a long while, rifle across my lap, engine off, listening. I wanted to convince myself it had been nothing, that I had overthought it. But I don't overthink in the woods. Not after all the years I've had out there. After that day, I started noticing patterns. Certain hollows I'd walk into would be dead silent, with that same off smell, and always the same creeping sense that I was being watched. I never once caught anything on thermal, night vision, or even on trail cams. Animals, yes. Deer, coyotes, foxes, plenty of hogs, but nothing that explained those moments. And here's the thing that sticks with me. Our wolves, the ones we keep at the sanctuary, they react to it too. There have been nights when they'll all go still at once, heads up, ears forward, eyes locked on the same patch of dark woods. Wolves aren't easily rattled. Ours know what bears smell like, what coyotes sound like, even what a cougar moving through feels like. But when that stillness hits, their tails go low, their hackles rise, and they pace the far side of their enclosures, as far as they can get from the tree line. One night, maybe a year ago, I was out late checking the fence line after hearing some strange noises. I had the AR with me, thermal up, moving methodical like always. The wolves were restless more than usual. As I made the loop around, I stopped dead, About 30 yards out in the woods just beyond the red glow of my headlamp, there was movement. Slow, deliberate, something big enough to break sticks underfoot, but moving as if it didn't care about noise. I swept thermal across it. Nothing. I could hear it plain as day, but the scope gave me only trees and cold ground. That was the moment I'll admit I was scared shitless, because sound doesn't lie. My eyes and tech might, but sound doesn't. I chambered around, stood still, and waited. The sound stopped. For a full 2 minutes, maybe longer, I didn't move. My hands were steady, but inside, everything was telling me I should not be there. Finally, I backed up, step by slow step, never turning, until I was behind the gate of the sanctuary. The wolves were silent now, all pressed against the back corners, eyes locked on the woods. I didn't sleep that night. Since then, I don't go into those woods the same way. I still carry, still bring thermal, still check cams, but I don't linger in the places that go quiet. I don't ignore the smell when it drifts in. I don't ignore the way the wolves act. What I know is this: there are things here that are not normal wildlife. Not ghosts, not monsters out of a book, but something that lives in the folds of these hills, something that doesn't want to be seen. I can't explain how it doesn't show on thermal. I can't explain why the smell doesn't match anything else I've cataloged. But I know it's real because I've felt it, smelled it, heard it, and I've seen the reaction in the wolves who have no reason to lie. The last time it happened, I was alone, about half a mile deep past the second creek. I had just set a new cam and was turning back when the silence hit. This time I didn't wait. I felt that same metallic taste at the back of my throat, the same weight in the air pressing down, and I turned and moved out fast, rifle up, not running but not wasting time. The silence followed me halfway to the truck before the normal forest sounds finally came back, like someone had flipped a switch. By the time I got in the driver's seat, I was dripping with sweat, heart pounding harder than it had in years. And I'm not ashamed to say it. I sat there with my rifle across my knees until dawn broke and the sun started cutting through the trees. That morning, when I finally pulled back onto the road, I knew one thing clear as day. Whatever it is out there, it doesn't want me there, and no amount of training, weapons, or tech is going to change that. I still go out, still do my work, still live here, but I no longer let myself think of the woods as mine to know. They belong to something else, something that hides just out of sight, and the only reason I'm here to talk about it is because, for now, it lets me leave. And that's the truth of it. I grew up in southern Louisiana, where the air itself seems to cling to you like a wet shirt, heavy with heat and the thick smell of mud, water, and things growing too fast to keep up with. The swamps and bayous weren't far from where I lived, though my family wasn't the kind to spend every day out in them, like some of the old folks around. Still, the sounds of frogs, cicadas, and the croak of something bigger in the dark were as normal to me as cars on a highway. It's just the kind of background noise you grow up with there. The strange thing is, I never thought of it as scary, at least not until that one night when I was a kid, and I can still remember every detail like it was burned into me. I was around 10 years old, maybe a little younger. I can't remember what day of the week it was, but I remember the feel of it. The house was hot, even with fans running, and the smell of fried food still hung in the air from earlier. My parents and some other adults had gone out somewhere, leaving me at the house by myself. That wasn't unusual, but it was rare at night. I was fine with it, though. I wasn't the kind of kid who spooked easily. I'd been in the woods. I'd been in boats in the swamp. I knew the sounds of animals and how the dark played tricks on you. None of that had ever bothered me. That night I was in the kitchen. The house itself was an old one, built out of wood, where the boards creaked even when no one was walking on them. The windows rattled sometimes if a gust of wind came through, and the screen doors slammed louder than seemed possible for their weight. You grow up with that and it becomes normal, just part of the bones of the house. I had both dogs in the house with me. They weren't big guard dogs, but they were good at letting you know if someone came up the drive, or if something was out of place. They were laying on the floor when I was in the kitchen, just lazy and relaxed, the way dogs get in the heat. Then without any warning, one of the doors inside the house slammed shut. Not just a click of the latch, not the kind of soft thud of wood shifting. This was a loud slam, hard enough that it made me jump. Before I could even make sense of it, the door off the kitchen, the one that opened into the narrow hall, swung shut with a force that made the frame shake. The dogs jumped up instantly, barking in a way I hadn't heard from them before, sharp and panicked. Not the usual someone's outside bark. And then I saw it. Between me and that door that had just slammed shut, something was there. A face just hanging in the air. It wasn't a person standing there. It didn't have shoulders or a body I could see, not even a shadow. Just a face hovering like it was cut out of the dark itself. I remember the skin looking pale, but not in the way of a sick person. More like there was no color to it at all. The eyes were wrong too. They weren't glowing or anything that dramatic, but they were wide open, too wide, staring right at me in a way that froze me where I stood. It felt like if I moved, it would move, and that thought alone had my stomach turning. The dogs went crazy, barking and snarling, hair standing up on their backs. I bolted before I could think. I ran past the living room and down the hall as fast as I could, straight to the bedroom at the far end of the house. I slammed the door, locked it, and pushed the little dresser against it, even though I knew it wasn't heavy enough to stop anyone if they wanted in. I stayed in there for hours, pressed into the corner of the bed, the dogs pacing and whining, growling every now and then like something was still out there. I didn't leave that room until I heard the adults come back home. Even then, I couldn't bring myself to step out until I heard their voices and the slam of the front screen door. When I told them what happened, they brushed it off. They said maybe the wind had caught the doors. Maybe I'd let my imagination get the better of me. Maybe it was just the house settling. I wasn't the kind of kid who made up stories, though. They all knew that, but they didn't believe me. I could tell from the looks they gave me, the way they said, uh-huh, and moved on. After that night, I refused to stay in that house alone after dark. If the adults left, I went with them, no matter where they were going. If I couldn't, then at the very least I made sure a neighbor was around. I wasn't scared of the woods or the swamp or being outside in the dark, but that house alone at night, no. Not anymore. That was the only time I ever saw something I couldn't explain in that house, just that once. But I never forgot it, and I never got over how real it felt. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't me making something up. It was there, and the dogs saw it too. That's what stays with me the most. Dogs don't imagine things. They react to what's there. As I got older, I heard stories from friends who spent more time out in the bayous than I ever did. Down there you hear things, not just from people, but from the land itself. The swamp carries sound in strange ways. You'll hear splashes that seem too big for a fish, voices that sound like they're drifting over the water, but when you listen harder, they're gone, or something brushing against the boat in the dark. My friends always swore by those stories, and I believe them because I know what I saw once in my own home. One story I remember clear came from a friend who went night fishing with his dad and pawpaw. Nighttime is the best for finding bullfrogs, so that's what they were after. He said they had tied the boat up among the cypress trees, flashlights sweeping the banks every so often, when he felt it. That crawling, cold feeling of being watched. At first he thought it was just his imagination, the way the swamp makes you feel when you're out there in the dark. But then he noticed the way his dad kept glancing back at the tree line too, and the way his pawpaw stopped talking and just sat there listening. He said they never saw anything move, but the feeling didn't go away. It only got stronger, like eyes were following them from every angle. Even when they pushed back out into the open water, that feeling clung to them until they finally got home. They never talked much about it after, but I could tell from the way he told the story, he believed every bit of it. That's the thing about growing up down there. You don't need ghosts or monsters to be scared. The swamp is alive in ways most people don't understand. There are animals out there that will make a meal out of you if you're careless. There are people too, The kind you don't want to run into in the dark. There are old stories passed down for generations about things that happen when the air is still and the water doesn't move the way it should. Whether you believe them or not, the feeling is real. For me, that night in the kitchen is enough. I don't know what I saw, and I don't try to explain it anymore. All I know is it was there and it was wrong. It made me feel like I wasn't safe in my own home. And that's a feeling that never really goes away once you've had it. When I think back on it now, I don't picture anything dramatic. I don't add to it in my head. I remember it just as it was. Doors slamming shut, dogs going wild, and a face in the air that shouldn't have been there. The swamp has a way of reminding you how small you are. Even if you don't go out into it, even if you only live nearby, it finds ways to show you that you're not in charge. That night was my reminder. I never saw anything like it again, but I didn't need to. Once was enough, and that's the truth of it.